I am Joanna, 33 years old, and last month I needed $10,000 to save my daughter's life. I called my husband desperate for the money we had saved. He told me he could not help because he had just closed on a beach house and told me to figure it out myself. Then my mother-in-law cut in, told me to go ask the army for a handout, and hung up. That evening, my father-in-law slipped an envelope into my hand. 3 days later, my husband was beating on my front door. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been pushed to your breaking point by the people who were supposed to protect you. The mechanical beeping of the heart monitor filled the pediatric intensive care unit in Chicago. I stood frozen beside the hospital bed, gripping the metal rail. My 7-year-old daughter, Lily, lay beneath a tangle of wires, her small chest rising and falling with a terrifying, ragged effort. Every breath she took sounded like crushed glass. I gently stroked her forehead, pushing a damp curl of brown hair away from her pale face. The underlying issue was getting worse by the minute. Dr. Aris, a pediatric pulmonary specialist, stood on the other side of the bed reviewing her chart. I watched his face closely, searching for hope, but his expression remained serious. He looked up from the clipboard and met my gaze. "The conventional therapies are not working anymore, Joanna." He spoke softly, but his words hit me with the force of a physical blow. "Her lungs are failing to oxygenate her blood at a sustainable rate. We need to initiate an immediate specialized treatment protocol to stabilize her respiratory system." I nodded quickly, feeling a surge of desperate relief that there was a plan. "Then do it," I said, my voice shaking. "Whatever she needs, please just do it right now." Dr. Aris sighed, a heavy sound that made my stomach drop. "That is the problem," he explained. "The specialized treatment involves an out-of-network medication and a proprietary ventilation therapy. I submitted the emergency authorization to your insurance provider 20 minutes ago, and they flatly denied the claim. They consider it experimental for her specific condition." I stared at him, unable to process what he was saying. Denied? How can they deny a treatment she needs to survive? I asked, the panic rising in my throat. "I work, my husband works, we have premium coverage. There has to be a mistake." Dr. Aris shook his head sadly. "Insurance companies look at algorithms, not the child in the bed. Our hospital administration requires an upfront, out-of-pocket payment to begin the procedure. It is $10,000. Without that payment, they will not release the medication from the pharmacy. We do not have time to wait for an appeal. She needs this treatment tonight." $10,000. The number echoed in my mind. It was substantial, but not impossible. Cameron and I had been building a joint emergency savings account for the past 5 years. We had $45,000 sitting in that account specifically for situations like this. We had sacrificed to build that safety net. I took a deep breath, forcing my military training to take over. Panic serves no purpose in a crisis. Action does. "I have it," I told the doctor firmly. "I will get the money transferred immediately. Just prep the treatment. I promise you the funds will be there." He nodded, looking relieved, and stepped out to alert his team. I walked into the brightly lit hospital corridor and pulled my phone from my pocket. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely unlock the screen. I scrolled to Cameron's contact and pressed call. Cameron had been away on a critical business trip in California for the past 2 weeks. He was a senior wealth manager at a prestigious financial brokerage. When Lily worsened 3 days ago, I tried to tell him to come home. He had told me he was in the middle of closing the biggest deal of his life, and that I was perfectly capable of handling a childhood cold on my own. It was not a cold, and I was entirely alone. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. I paced the length of the hallway. "Please pick up," I muttered to myself, praying he was not in a meeting. On the 5th ring, the line finally connected. Before Cameron even spoke, a wave of loud, upbeat music and the unmistakable sound of clinking glass spilled through the speaker. It sounded like a party, a loud, vibrant celebration. "Cameron," I gasped relief flooding my chest simply because he had answered. Thank God. I need you to listen to me very carefully. Cameron sighed loudly into the phone, the sound of his irritation cutting through the background noise. Joanna, what is it I told you? I am swamped right now. I am at a very important networking event. His words were slightly slurred, his tone dripping with the kind of casual arrogance I had come to detest over the past year. Cameron Lilly is in the pediatric intensive care unit, I said, forcing my voice to remain steady despite the terror gripping my heart. Her lungs are failing. The doctors need to do an emergency treatment right now, but the insurance denied the claim. The hospital needs $10,000 upfront to release the medication. I need you to log into the joint portal and wire the money to my checking account immediately so I can pay the billing department. The background music swelled for a moment. Someone laughed, a high-pitched melodic sound. I waited for the sudden shift in his voice, the panic of a father realizing his child was in mortal danger. I waited for him to drop whatever drink he was holding and scramble for his laptop. Instead, there was a long, agonizing pause. Then Cameron let out an exasperated groan. Joanna, you are always blowing things out of proportion, he said smoothly, as if we were discussing a minor inconvenience rather than our daughter's life. It is probably just a minor flare-up. You always panic when she gets a little chest cold. The doctors are just trying to squeeze you for expensive treatments. Tell them to give her a breathing treatment and she will be fine by morning. I stopped pacing and leaned against the hospital wall. My mind struggled to grasp the sheer absurdity of his response. A minor flare-up. She is attached to a machine keeping her alive, Cameron. I am not exaggerating. I am not asking for your medical opinion. I am asking you to transfer $10,000 of our own money so our daughter does not die tonight. Just open the app and do it. Another long pause followed. The sound of waves crashing against the shore mingled with the party music in the background. I cannot send you anything, Joanna, he said, his tone chillingly casual. What do you mean you cannot send me anything? I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. The emergency fund has $45,000 in it. It takes 2 seconds to wire the funds. I literally cannot do it, he replied, completely unfazed by the desperation in my voice. We just closed on a beach house in Malibu this afternoon. The emergency fund covered the final closing costs and the broker fees. I needed liquid cash to finalize the deed. You are just going to have to figure it out yourself. The world seemed to stop spinning. The hallway around me tilted dangerously. A beach house. While I had been sitting in a hospital room watching our child suffocate, he had drained our life savings to buy luxury real estate. The sheer audacity of his response paralyzed me. A blinding rage ignited in my chest, replacing the fear. Before I could scream at him or demand he reverse the transaction, the phone rustled sharply. I heard Cameron say something muffled, and then the phone was handed to someone else. Beatrice's voice came through the speaker before I could say another word. She sounded irritated rather than concerned, as though Lily's medical emergency had interrupted an important celebration. Joanna, she said sharply, Cameron has already explained the situation. You have always been dramatic whenever that child gets sick. He made a necessary financial decision, and you need to stop trying to punish him for being successful. This is not a disagreement about money, I said. Lily's lungs are failing. The doctors need $10,000 tonight, or they cannot begin the treatment. Beatrice gave a cold, dismissive laugh. Then go ask the army for another handout. You spent years reminding everyone that you served your country. Perhaps the government can finally make itself useful. Cameron is not sacrificing a valuable property investment because you cannot control your emotions. Before I could answer, the call ended. I stood in the corridor staring at the dark screen, stunned by the silence that followed. A nurse hurried past carrying a sealed medication case, and the sight of it reminded me that every second mattered. I returned to Lily's room long enough to kiss her forehead, then stepped outside to contact the hospital's billing department and find another way to secure the money. As I crossed the parking lot, a familiar figure emerged from the shadows between 2 rows of cars. Winston Cameron's father walked toward me with his shoulders hunched against the cold. He looked frightened and exhausted, repeatedly glancing behind him as though he expected Beatrice to appear. I heard what happened, he said quietly. Beatrice called me after she hung up on you. She thought it was funny. His face tightened with shame. He reached beneath his coat and removed a thick manila envelope sealed with dark wax. I cannot undo what my son has done, Joanna, but you need to see this. Cameron left copies of the closing documents in my study before he flew to California. I looked through them after Beatrice began bragging about the house. Your name is everywhere, but I know you never agreed to any of it. He pressed the envelope into my hands. Do not call Cameron until you have read every page, Winston warned. And do not let Beatrice know I gave this to you. There is more inside that envelope than a house purchase. I thanked him, but Winston was already retreating toward his car, fear and guilt pulling him away before either of us could say anything more. Winston's taillights bled into the red haze of the hospital parking lot before disappearing completely around the concrete corner. The silence inside my modest sedan felt deafening after the chaos of the pediatric intensive care unit and the venom of Beatrice's voice on the phone. I sat perfectly still in the driver's seat, my hands resting heavily on the steering wheel, the thick manila envelope sitting like a lead weight in my lap. The engine was off. The night air was biting, seeping through the cracked window, but the cold barely registered against the icy numbness spreading through my chest. Winston was a man who lived his entire life avoiding conflict, perpetually bowing his head to Beatrice's relentless demands and Cameron's bloated arrogance. For him to sneak into the shadows of a hospital parking lot to deliver this directly to me meant the contents were highly volatile. I turned on the overhead dome light. The pale yellow glow illuminated the thick wax seal of the envelope. My hands, which had remained entirely steady during mortar fire in Afghanistan, now shook slightly as I ripped the heavy paper open. I pulled out a massive stack of legal documents bound by a thick black binder clip. The top page bore the crest of a prominent California real estate law firm. Underneath the crest, bold black letters spelled out the stark reality of my husband's betrayal. Finalized escrow and closing documents. Property address 21,450 Pacific Coast Highway, Malibu, California. I stared at the address. Malibu. Cameron had actually done it. While I spent the past 2 weeks shuttling Lily between specialists and holding her hand through agonizing coughing fits, he had been finalizing the purchase of a multi-million-dollar beach estate. I flipped past the title page, my eyes scanning the dense legal jargon, looking for the financial breakdown. I needed to understand how he had managed to drain an emergency fund of $45,000 and parlay that into a luxury coastal property. The emergency fund would barely cover the closing costs on a property of this magnitude, let alone the required down payment. I found the loan origination summary on the 4th page. My breath caught in my throat. The panic I had felt upstairs in the ICU morphed into something much darker and far more dangerous. The conflict escalated exponentially as I read the fine print. Cameron had not just drained our joint savings account. He had secured a massive mortgage using assets I had never authorized him to touch. There, printed clearly under the list of leveraged collateral, was my Veterans Affairs disability payout. I had earned that compensation after surviving an improvised explosive device blast that shattered my left leg and ended my military career. It was my blood money awarded for permanent physical damage, and Cameron had listed it as guaranteed recurring income to back his luxury mortgage. My eyes darted down the page, taking in the rest of the financial devastation. He had not stopped at my disability. He had also leveraged my military life insurance policies, borrowing heavily against their maximum cash value. These were the policies I had set up specifically to ensure Lily would be protected if anything ever happened to me. He had gutted our daughter's safety net to buy a house on the beach. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead as I flipped to the signature pages. To leverage those specific military assets, the bank would have required my explicit consent, my physical presence, and my notarized signature. I stared at the bottom of the loan agreement. There was my name, Joanna Wilson, signed in smooth, flowing cursive. It was a flawless forgery. Cameron had spent years watching me sign documents. He knew the exact curve of the J, the sharp angle of the W. He had forged my signature, committed federal wire fraud, and stolen my military benefits, all while looking me in the eye and telling me he was working late to secure our family's future. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. The sheer scale of the financial ruin was staggering. If this mortgage defaulted, the bank would not just take the beach house. They would seize my disability payments. They would liquidate the life insurance. Cameron had tied my entire financial existence to a property I had never seen, and he had done it entirely behind my back. The betrayal was so absolute, so meticulously planned, that it temporarily took my breath away. He had orchestrated this theft over months, gathering my private military documents, falsifying notary stamps, and routing the funds through escrow. But the betrayals did not stop at financial ruin. I forced myself to keep reading, flipping through the endless pages of disclosures and property boundary surveys. Winston had given me this envelope for a specific reason, and the forgery was only the first layer of the poison. I reached the final page of the deed, the document that established the legal ownership of the Malibu estate. I scanned the CO ownership clause, expecting to see Cameron's name listed alongside his holding company. Instead, a different name jumped off the stark white page. It was typed clearly under the line designated for the primary co-owner, Amber Collins. The name hit me like a physical strike. Amber. I knew that name. Amber was Cameron's junior associate at his financial brokerage firm. She was 26 years old, freshly graduated from an elite university, with a penchant for wearing designer clothes that far exceeded her entry-level salary. She had attended our holiday party last year. I remembered her standing in my kitchen sipping my wine, laughing too loudly at Cameron's jokes, and looking at me with a thinly veiled expression of pity. Cameron had always brushed off my discomfort, calling her ambitious and eager to learn the ropes of wealth management. The narrative pieces suddenly snapped together with sickening clarity. The puzzle I had been failing to solve for the past year was now entirely complete. The late nights at the office were not spent analyzing market trends. The sudden increase in weekend business trips were not for securing high net worth clients. The drained emergency accounts, the missing funds, the forged documents. Cameron was not building a future for our family. Cameron is building a luxury life with his mistress using his wife's military benefits, while his daughter is suffocating in a hospital bed just yards away. I sat in the dim light of the car, staring at the intertwined signatures of Cameron Wilson and Amber Collins on the property deed. They were legally bound together now, co-owners of a Malibu estate funded by my shattered leg and my daughter's stolen future. I imagined them standing on the balcony of that beach house, listening to the ocean, celebrating their brilliant real estate investment, while I was preparing to sleep in a hospital parking lot. The contrast was so violent, it felt surreal. Less than 200 yards away on the fourth floor of the massive brick hospital, my 7-year-old daughter was fighting a failing respiratory system. Lily was suffocating in a sterile room, her life dependent on a $10,000 out-of-pocket payment that her father had explicitly refused to provide. He had dismissed her critical medical emergency as a minor flare-up because admitting the truth would mean interrupting his victory lap with Amber. He had chosen to let his daughter suffer, potentially, to let her die, rather than divert a single cent away from his new coastal paradise. I forced myself to breathe slowly as the full scale of Cameron's betrayal settled over me. Tears would not release Lily's medication, and rage would not protect her future. I carefully aligned the closing documents, returned them to the envelope, and placed the evidence beneath the passenger seat, where no one could see it. Cameron and Beatrice believed they had left me frightened, penniless, and completely dependent on them. They believed my quiet nature was weakness, and my military injuries had made me easy to control. They had made a catastrophic mistake. Without leaving the driver's seat, I reached into the back of the sedan and pulled forward the reinforced black backpack I carried everywhere. Inside was the matte black encrypted laptop Cameron regularly mocked. To him, it was merely the tool of a struggling freelance information technology consultant who fixed routers and home networks for pocket change. He had never once asked why an ordinary freelance technician needed military-grade encryption or biometric security. I opened the laptop and watched the screen illuminate the dark interior of the car. Cameron believed he had taken away my final resource. In reality, he had never known what resources I possessed. What they did not know was that after leaving the military, I did not just tinker with personal computers. I had partnered with 3 of my former intelligence unit buddies. Together, we had spent the last 6 years building a defense-grade logistics and cybersecurity software firm from the ground up. We designed highly encrypted communication networks for private security contractors operating overseas. We built silent alarm protocols and unhackable financial routing systems for international corporations. Just 3 weeks ago, our firm was quietly acquired by a massive government contractor. The buyout was highly classified, bound by strict non-disclosure agreements, and completely off the grid. I was currently sitting on a liquid and entirely untraceable net worth of $18 million. Cameron thought he had left me destitute. He thought he had trapped me in a corner with 0 resources and a dying child. He was about to learn a very painful lesson about underestimating a veteran. I flipped the laptop open and typed in my 32-character encryption sequence. The screen illuminated the dark interior of my car with a pale blue glow. My first and only priority was Lily. I completely ignored the banking application showing our drained emergency fund. Instead, I accessed my private corporate financial portal. The interface was sterile and secure, requiring a retinal scan and a secondary biometric authentication from my smartwatch before granting access. Once inside, I saw the $18 million balance sitting safely in an offshore holding account. I quickly initiated a direct wire transfer. I routed $10,000 straight to the hospital billing department, bypassing standard banking delays through a secure clearinghouse we had built for our international clients. I attached a priority medical authorization code to the transfer to ensure immediate processing. Within 40 seconds, my phone buzzed with a direct message from Dr. Eris. The funds had cleared. The pharmacy was releasing the medication. Lily was going to receive her life-saving treatment right now. A massive wave of relief washed over me, but I did not allow myself to relax or shed a single tear of joy. My daughter was safe, which meant I was finally free to go on the offensive. I cracked my knuckles and stretched my fingers over the keyboard. It was time to show Cameron what a struggling freelance consultant could actually do when pushed to the absolute brink. Using my elite cybersecurity expertise, I initiated a complete digital lockdown of Cameron's life. He had always been incredibly careless with his digital security, using simple passwords and saving his login credentials on unsecured browsers because he believed he was untouchable. I had never snooped before because I respected the boundaries of our marriage, but that marriage was now dead and buried under a forged mortgage. I started with the remaining joint checking and savings accounts. They were nearly empty, but I froze them completely. I initiated a suspected fraud lock on the accounts, which meant neither of us could withdraw a single cent without appearing in person at a local bank branch with 2 forms of government identification. Next, I moved to his personal banking portals. Cameron had a private account he used for his daily expenses, his expensive client lunches, and his secret gifts for Amber. I slipped past his weak security questions in a matter of seconds. I changed his primary password to a randomly generated string of 40 alphanumeric characters. I altered the recovery email address to an encrypted server that only I controlled. I changed the security phone number to a burner line I had set up years ago for testing network vulnerabilities. Cameron was now completely locked out of his own money. If he tried to log in, he would get a system error. If he tried to reset the password, the confirmation link would go straight to my secure server. He was financially blind and paralyzed. But I was not finished. Cameron loved his status symbols more than he loved his own family. He loved pulling out his heavy platinum credit cards to impress his clients and his young mistress. I accessed the credit card company networks one by one, using a backdoor entry I had designed for a previous security audit. I canceled every single secondary credit card attached to our household. I flagged his primary platinum card for international fraud, knowing the algorithm would immediately suspend the account until a lengthy and painful investigation could be completed. I imagined him standing in a high-end furniture store in Malibu, with Amber trying to buy imported Italian leather sofas for their new beach house. I pictured him handing his heavy metal card to a cashier with a smug smile, only to have it firmly declined. I visualized the embarrassment spreading across his face as the cashier told him the card was flagged for suspected fraud. He would try his backup cards, and they would all fail miserably. He would try to transfer funds from his checking account, and he would find himself entirely locked out of the system. I systematically dismantled his digital footprint piece by piece. I revoked his access to the airline miles account he was undoubtedly planning to use for future romantic getaways with Amber. I suspended his premium car service membership. I even logged into his favorite luxury meal delivery application and scrambled the payment methods so he could not even order a late-night dinner. I left absolutely no stone unturned in my digital assault. Every convenience, every luxury, every financial safety net he relied upon was now permanently severed. I set a silent trap across his entire digital ecosystem. I programmed a custom script to send a secure ping to my smartwatch every time Cameron attempted to use a declined card or access a locked account. I wanted to track his rising panic in real time. I wanted to monitor exactly when the reality of his situation began to crush him. I leaned back in the driver's seat and watched the hospital entrance through my windshield. The cold night air no longer bothered me. I felt a strange, comforting warmth radiating from the knowledge that I had completely neutralized him without ever raising my voice. Cameron thought he was the brilliant architect of my destruction. He thought he had orchestrated the perfect betrayal, stealing my military benefits to fund his new life while leaving me to deal with a sick child and $0. He had assumed my silence over the years was a sign of weakness and submission. He mistook my modesty for ignorance and my patience for stupidity. He had no idea that he had just handed me the moral justification to unleash an $18 million arsenal against him and his arrogant mother. My smartwatch vibrated aggressively against my wrist. I glanced down at the small, illuminated screen in the dark car. It was an alert from the credit card company. A charge for $400 at a high-end Malibu restaurant had just been declined. A cold, genuine smile spread across my face. It was the first time I had smiled in days. Cameron was currently sitting across from Amber finishing an expensive celebration dinner, and he was about to discover that his money was completely gone. He was about to experience a tiny fraction of the absolute helplessness I had felt when I saw the zero balance in our emergency fund. Another vibration followed almost immediately. This time it was a login failure alert from his primary bank portal. He was trying to figure out why his card was declined. He was trying to access his checking account to transfer funds to save face in front of his mistress. I watched the alerts roll in one after another, painting a vivid and highly entertaining picture of his escalating desperation. He tried his password twice. Then he hit the forgotten password link in a panic. I watched the reset email arrive in my secure inbox, and I deleted it immediately without opening it. He was completely trapped. He was standing in a luxury restaurant on the other side of the country with a woman he was having an affair with, and he could not even pay the bill. The satisfaction was deep and sustaining, but I knew this was only the first phase of the war. Freezing his accounts and declining his credit cards would cause immediate chaos and humiliation, but it would not destroy the fake empire he was trying to build with my money. I needed to let him panic. I needed to let him feel the walls closing in on him before I delivered the final devastating blow that would end his career and his relationship. I closed my encrypted laptop and slid it safely back into my heavy backpack. I stepped out of the cold car and locked the doors behind me. I walked back toward the hospital entrance, my steps measured and calm. I was going back to my daughter. I was going to hold Lily's hand while the medication did its work and her lungs healed. And I was going to wait for Cameron to come crawling to me. The silent trap was set perfectly, and the prey was already caught in the digital wires. I just had to wait for him to realize he was completely and utterly ruined. 3 days later, the sterile hospital smells were finally replaced by the comforting scent of lavender laundry detergent in our own home. The out-of-network treatment had worked exactly as Dr. Eris promised. Lily was resting comfortably upstairs in her own bed, her breathing completely stabilized, the terrifying rasp in her chest entirely gone. I had spent the last 72 hours entirely focused on her recovery, sleeping in a chair beside her bed and monitoring her oxygen levels with the portable pulse oximeter the hospital had sent home with us. Once I was absolutely certain she was safe and out of danger, I shifted my focus to the physical removal of Cameron from our lives. I walked into our master bedroom and bypassed the closet organization system I had carefully installed 2 years ago. I did not pull out his expensive leather luggage or the monogrammed garment bags his mother had bought him for Christmas. Instead, I unrolled a box of heavy-duty black contractor trash bags. I started yanking his custom-tailored Italian wool suits right off their cedar hangers, letting the expensive fabric crumple into the bottom of the plastic bags. I tossed in his silk ties, his imported dress shirts, and his ridiculous collection of designer loafers. I was tying the yellow plastic drawstrings of the second bulging bag when a sudden violent pounding erupted downstairs. The heavy oak of our front door shuddered against the frame, the dull thud echoing through the quiet house. I checked the baby monitor app on my phone to ensure Lily was still asleep, then grabbed the trash bags and dragged them toward the landing. The frantic pounding did not stop. It escalated into aggressive kicking, rattling the stained glass panels bordering the entryway. I descended the stairs slowly, letting the heavy trash bags bump against each carpeted step with a satisfying thud. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open to find Cameron standing on the porch, his face flushed a deep, mottled red. He was wearing a casual linen shirt, unbuttoned at the collar, and expensive sunglasses pushed back into his perfectly styled hair, looking every bit the Malibu playboy he was trying so desperately to become. But his manufactured, laid-back aesthetic was completely ruined by the absolute panic contorting his features. He pushed his way past me into the foyer, his chest heaving as if he had sprinted all the way from California. He glared at me, his fists clenched at his sides. "My primary credit card was declined at a luxury furniture showroom this morning," he hissed, his voice vibrating with barely contained rage. I was standing there with Amber finalizing the purchase of an imported Italian leather sectional for the new living room, and the terminal rejected my platinum card. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was? I had to tell the sales manager it was a bank error, but when I tried to use my backup cards, every single one of them was flagged and frozen. I tried to log into the joint portal to wire the funds manually, and my password was invalid. What exactly did you do to our accounts? I stood in the entryway perfectly calm, my hands resting lightly on the black plastic drawstrings of his garbage bags. I did not speak immediately. I let his frantic, ragged breathing fill the silence of the foyer. My silence seemed to infuriate him further. He took a step toward me, towering over me, attempting to use his physical size to intimidate me back into submission. "I know you did this, Joanna," he sneered, pointing a finger directly at my face. "You are the only one with the technical know-how to mess with the login credentials. You are acting like a psychotic, jealous wife simply because I made an executive financial decision. You have absolutely no right to freeze my assets just because you are upset about a real estate transaction. You are completely financially illiterate. You always have been. You do not understand how wealth building actually works, and you are sabotaging my brilliant real estate investments just to throw a childish temper tantrum. I am trying to build a legacy, a real portfolio that will secure our future, and you are throwing a wrench into the gears because you do not have the vision to see the big picture." He paced across the hardwood floor, waving his hands frantically as he continued his loud, arrogant monologue. "And do not even try to use Lily as an excuse for this insane behavior," he continued, his tone turning incredibly condescending. "I told you 3 days ago that you were overreacting about her health. You have always been a helicopter mother, rushing her to the emergency room every time she coughs. You wanted me to drop the biggest deal of my entire career and wire $10,000 for what turned out to be a minor respiratory flare-up. She is perfectly fine now, just like I said she would be. You tried to use a childhood cold to manipulate me into missing my closing window, and when I refused to bow to your anxiety, you decided to hack into my bank accounts. As the man of this house, I have the absolute right to move our money where it serves this family best. I am the primary breadwinner. I am the financial expert. You are just a struggling freelance IT consultant who fixes routers for pocket change. You have no right to question my investments, and you certainly have no right to humiliate me in front of Amber and the showroom staff. I demand that you unlock those accounts and restore my credit access right this second. Or I swear to God, Joanna, I will call the police and have you arrested for cybercrimes. He stopped pacing and stood in front of me, crossing his arms over his chest, expecting me to crumble. He expected tears, apologies, or at the very least a desperate argument about his infidelity. He had spent years conditioning me to back down whenever he raised his voice. He was waiting for the frightened, compliant wife to emerge and fix the mess she had created. I did not yell. I did not argue. I did not even mention Amber's name or the forged signatures on the Malibu deed. I maintained eye contact, my expression entirely unreadable. I slowly dragged the two heavy black trash bags across the foyer and dropped them directly at his expensive leather shoes. The plastic bags hit the floor with a heavy, unceremonious thud, a couple of wire hangers poking sharply against the thin plastic. Cameron stared down at the garbage bags, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. "What is this?" he asked, his voice losing a fraction of its aggressive edge. "What are you doing?" "These are the imported Italian suits you love so much," I said, my voice quiet, steady, and entirely devoid of emotion. "I packed them for you since you seem to be officially relocating to the West Coast." I reached into the back pocket of my jeans and pulled out a single sheet of heavy bond paper. It was not a printout from my computer. It was a formal certified letter that had been overnighted to the house via courier that very morning. I unfolded the document smoothly and extended it toward him. He looked at the paper, then back at me, his arrogance slowly giving way to a creeping sense of dread. He snatched the paper from my hand and began reading the bold print at the top of the page. It was a formal notification from our primary banking institution, the same bank that held the emergency fund he had completely drained. I watched his eyes dart across the text, waiting for the exact moment his manufactured bravado shattered into pieces. The letter explicitly stated that all financial assets tied directly to his Social Security number had been subject to a total and indefinite freeze due to suspected fraudulent activity regarding his recent real estate purchase. He slowly looked up at me, the vibrant color draining completely from his face, his mouth hanging open in total silence. Before the first syllable of a defense could materialize on his lips, the blinding sweep of halogen headlights arched across my manicured front lawn. The heavy purr of a finely tuned German engine cut through the freezing night air as a silver Mercedes SUV jerked to an abrupt halt directly behind my modest sedan. The driver's side door flew open before the massive vehicle was even fully parked. Beatrice marched up the concrete walkway, the sharp clicks of her designer heels sounding like a metronome ticking down to an explosion. She wore a pristine cashmere coat draped elegantly over her shoulders, her jewelry catching the pale yellow glow of the porch light. She did not look at the heavy black trash bags resting at her son's feet. She did not look at the formal bank notice trembling in his hand. Her eyes locked onto me, burning with the familiar suffocating contempt she had harbored since the day Cameron first brought me home. "What on earth is going on here?" Beatrice demanded, her voice carrying that effortless aristocratic authority she wielded like a weapon. She bypassed me entirely, placing a protective hand on Cameron's shoulder, instinctively shielding her golden child from whatever consequence he was currently facing. He called me in a complete panic, saying his cards were declining at the showroom. I had to wire funds directly to the merchant from my personal account, just so he could secure the deposit on the Malibu property. "Have you completely lost your mind, Joanna?" I stood my ground on the porch, feeling the icy wind whip past my face. I am not the one who committed federal wire fraud to buy a beach house while my daughter was on a ventilator, I replied, my tone flat and even. Beatrice let out a sharp theatrical scoff. She waved her diamond-clad hand in the air, physically brushing away my factual statement. "Oh, please stop with the melodramatics," she snapped. "Cameron told me all about Lily's little hospital visit. You have always been prone to hysterical exaggerations when it comes to that child. You are using a seasonal chest cold to sabotage your husband's financial moves because you are too narrow-minded to understand wealth accumulation. You are a toxic element holding this man back from his true potential." Cameron found his voice emboldened by his mother's sudden and aggressive arrival. I tried to explain that I was securing our family legacy. She is just a struggling freelance IT consultant. She locked my accounts out of pure, unadulterated jealousy. Beatrice turned her piercing gaze back to me, her eyes narrowing into cold slits. "You are a bitter, broken woman, Joanna," she sneered, pointing a manicured finger toward the interior of my modest house. "You sit in this utterly depressing suburban box, and you resent Cameron for actually wanting a beautiful life. Instead of supporting him, you throw a tantrum. You have absolutely no right to interfere with his money." "It is not his money, Beatrice," I stated simply. "He forged my signature on federal loan documents. He drained Lily's emergency medical fund. He leveraged my military disability payouts and life insurance to buy a vacation home with his junior associate." Beatrice did not gasp at his infidelity or financial crimes. She looked at me with predatory calculation. "Men with Cameron's ambition have needs, Joanna. They require a partner who matches their drive. If you were a proper wife, he would not look elsewhere. He is merely reallocating assets for a higher return. It is brilliant financial maneuvering that ensures my granddaughter is provided for." The sheer audacity of her statement hung in the freezing air. She was openly justifying his infidelity and validating his felony theft. She stepped closer, invading my space with the same intimidation tactics she had used for a decade. In fact, Beatrice continued, "Since you cannot handle the responsibilities of marriage, perhaps you are incapable of handling motherhood." My heart rate remained completely steady. I looked her directly in the eyes. "What exactly are you implying, Beatrice?" "I am stating a fact," she smirked. "We have the best family lawyers on retainer. If you try to drag my son through a divorce or report these imaginary crimes, we will strip your parental rights." Cameron straightened up, looking confident. "We will take full custody of Lily," he added. Beatrice nodded. "We will tell the judge all about your unstable military PTSD. We will pull your medical records from the Department of Veterans Affairs. We will paint a clear picture of a broken, traumatized soldier who is too mentally fragile to provide a stable home. You will be deemed an unfit mother, Joanna. You will lose this house, your daughter, and walk away with nothing. So unlock those accounts, take these garbage bags inside, and accept our settlement." They stood on my porch, a united front of privilege and arrogance. They believed my military background was a liability they could weaponize in court. They thought my trauma was a documented flaw they could exploit. I did not panic. I did not scream or beg or attempt to defend my mental stability. I looked at Cameron, whose credit cards were frozen in a vault I controlled. I looked at Beatrice, whose wealth was tied up in outdated trusts. I smiled. It was a cold smile. "I think you should leave my property," I said, carrying the chilling calm of a predator. Beatrice scoffed. "Come along, Cameron. We are done engaging with this lunacy. Our legal team will serve her with the custody papers by Monday morning. She can spend the weekend packing her bags." Cameron grabbed his trash bag, struggling under the awkward weight. He shot me a venomous glare before marching toward his mother's vehicle. I stood silently watching as he shoved the custom suits into the trunk. He climbed into the passenger seat and Beatrice slammed the accelerator. The tires squealed as they sped off, entirely convinced they had won. The freezing air bit at my cheeks, but the physical chill was nothing compared to the unwavering determination settling deep inside my bones. I stood still, letting the quiet reality of the night wash over me. They had played their final hand, exposing every ounce of their toxic arrogance and calculated cruelty. They handed me the weapon I needed to ensure my daughter's future remained untouched by their corruption. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my smartphone. The screen was illuminated with a new notification. It was a secure file transfer from the private investigator I had retained exactly 3 days ago. I tapped the screen authorizing the biometric scan to unlock the heavily encrypted document. The file opened displaying a dense, highly detailed forensic accounting report. The investigator was a former military intelligence contractor who specialized in tracing hidden offshore assets and unraveling complex corporate embezzlement schemes. I had paid a premium for absolute discretion and total digital penetration of Cameron's brokerage firm. I scrolled past the executive summary, my eyes scanning the highlighted columns of transferred funds. The truth of Cameron's Malibu down payment stared back at me in stark, irrefutable numbers. My emergency fund and my stolen life insurance policies had not been enough to secure the multi-million-dollar property outright. The bank had required a significant influx of liquid cash to finalize the escrow. Cameron had not earned that cash. He had not received a sudden massive corporate bonus. The report revealed a devastating new layer of conflict. He had systematically embezzled $200,000 directly from his top-tier clients at his brokerage firm. He had created phantom holding companies, slowly siphoning funds from elderly clients who trusted him to manage their wealth. He had stolen from his own clients to fund Amber's lavish coastal lifestyle. I stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting in my eyes. The custody threat evaporated into nothingness. Cameron was not just an unfaithful husband or a terrible father. He was a corporate criminal facing decades in a federal penitentiary. The trap I had set was no longer just about freezing his personal checking accounts. It was about handing a massive federal embezzlement case directly to the Securities and Exchange Commission. The sheer magnitude of Cameron's stupidity practically hummed from the glowing screen of my laptop. He had not just crossed a moral line by betraying our marriage. He had crossed a massive federal boundary that carried mandatory minimum prison sentences. I took a slow, deep breath. The adrenaline that usually accompanied a combat drop flooded my veins, but my hands remained entirely steady. I downloaded the entire forensic accounting report, encrypting the files with a triple-layer security protocol before routing them directly to a secure server controlled by my legal team. I did not immediately forward the evidence to the Securities and Exchange Commission. A tactical strike requires perfect timing, and dropping the embezzlement bomb right now would only cause Cameron to scramble. I needed him to commit his lies to the official legal record before I detonated the ground beneath his feet. I carefully closed the encrypted laptop. The opening salvo arrived exactly 48 hours after Lily was finally discharged and resting comfortably at home. I was in the kitchen slicing apples for her afternoon snack when a sharp, authoritative knock echoed through the front hallway. I wiped my hands and opened the door to find a man in a rumpled suit holding a thick stack of manila folders. He verified my identity, shoved the papers into my hands, and walked away without another word. Cameron and Beatrice had wasted absolutely no time launching their legal strike. I was formally served with emergency custody papers alongside a petition for an immediate injunction to force the sale of our primary family residence. I carried them to the kitchen. I read through the affidavit submitted to the family court judge, my jaw tightening with every fabricated sentence. Beatrice had clearly orchestrated the legal strategy, weaponizing every detail of my past to paint me as an unfit, unstable mother. The documents claimed my military service had left me severely traumatized and prone to violent outbursts. They cited my PTSD evaluation, twisting medical terminology to suggest I was a danger to my own child. But the most insidious lies centered around our finances. Cameron had submitted sworn statements portraying himself as the wealthy, responsible provider who was desperately trying to rescue his daughter from crushing poverty and an unsafe home environment. The affidavit brazenly stated that I was broke, unemployed, and entirely incapable of affording Lily's basic medical care. He referenced the $10,000 hospital bill, claiming I had hysterically demanded he drain his crucial investment capital because I had zero savings. To make matters worse, the petition demanded an immediate forced sale of our family home. Cameron claimed the property needed to be liquidated so he could use the funds to establish a stable environment for Lily in California. He was literally trying to render me homeless to finance the Malibu estate he had purchased with Amber. The absolute sheer audacity of filing these official documents while actively embezzling from his clients was staggering to witness in real time. I did not dissolve into tears or panic at the sight of the aggressive legal threats. Instead, I drove straight to the offices of Sterling and Vance, the most ruthless family law firm in Chicago. I had retained them the morning after my $18 million acquisition cleared. My lead attorney, a razor-sharp woman named Evelyn, reviewed the emergency custody petition with a cold eye. She noted every perjured statement, every falsified financial claim, and every exaggerated accusation of mental instability. I handed her the encrypted drive containing the forensic accounting report detailing Cameron's massive embezzlement scheme. We agreed on a specific calculated strategy. We would not reveal my newly acquired wealth. We would not mention the embezzlement. We would walk into the mandatory court-ordered mediation session playing the exact role they expected me to flawlessly play for them. The 48 hours leading up to the mediation were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Cameron sent a barrage of aggressive text messages, clearly frustrated that his assets remained frozen. He alternated between threatening to have me arrested and offering pitiful settlements if I agreed to sign over full custody immediately. Beatrice left multiple voicemails dripping with false concern as she advised me to simply give up. I ignored every single communication. I focused entirely on Lily, ensuring she was recovering well and completely insulated from the toxic fallout of her father's actions. I spent my evenings organizing the digital evidence, building a flawless timeline of Cameron's infidelity, his financial theft, and his reckless disregard for our daughter's life. The morning of the mandatory mediation arrived with heavy gray skies and a biting wind that swept through the downtown financial district. I wore a simple, unbranded gray suit, deliberately avoiding any outward display of the massive wealth I now possessed. I wanted to look exactly like the struggling, overwhelmed mother they had described in their vicious court filings. I rode the elevator up to the 40th floor of the law firm chosen by the court mediator. I was directed to Conference Room B, a large glass-walled space intentionally designed to intimidate. I walked through the heavy glass doors to find the ambush already fully assembled. Cameron and Beatrice were seated on one side of a massive oak conference table. They were flanked by three aggressive-looking attorneys in $1,000 suits, their briefcases open and their laptops humming. Cameron wore a custom navy suit, his hair perfectly styled, exuding the manufactured confidence of a wildly successful wealth manager. Beatrice sat beside him in a cream-colored designer dress, her posture rigid and triumphant. They looked like royalty preparing to dismiss a peasant. As I pulled out a chair on the opposite side of the long table, I saw the smug, victorious smiles stretch across their faces. They were entirely convinced that I was cornered, penniless, and terrified. They fully expected me to fold under the immense financial and legal pressure they had orchestrated. The mediator, an older man with a neutral expression, took his seat at the head of the table. He recited the standard legal disclaimers, explaining that the goal of this session was to reach a mutually agreeable settlement regarding custody and the division of assets before escalating to a full trial. Before the mediator could even finish his introductory remarks, Cameron's lead attorney, a bulldog of a man named Davis, aggressively seized control of the conversation. "My client is prepared to offer a highly generous settlement to resolve this matter today," Davis announced, his voice booming across the polished oak table. "We understand that Mrs. Wilson is currently unemployed and lacks the basic financial resources to provide a stable medical or emotional environment for the minor child. Mr. Wilson is willing to assume full physical and legal custody immediately, ensuring the child receives top-tier medical care in California. In exchange, Mr. Wilson will generously agree not to pursue criminal charges regarding the recent unauthorized freezing of his personal financial assets. Furthermore, we demand the immediate listing and sale of the Chicago property, with all proceeds returning to my client to offset the damages caused by Mrs. Wilson's erratic behavior." I sat perfectly still, my hands folded neatly in my lap, maintaining a blank, unreadable expression. Beatrice leaned forward, resting her diamond-encrusted fingers on the table. "You should take the deal, Joanna," she said, her voice laced with venomous pity. "You cannot afford to fight us. You cannot even afford to pay your daughter's hospital bills without throwing a hysterical fit. Cameron is offering you a graceful exit. Sign the papers, hand over the house, and let a real provider take care of Lily. Do not make us destroy you in open court. You know your mental health records will ruin you." I looked at Cameron, who was staring at me with a cruel, satisfied smirk. He truly believed he had outsmarted me. He believed his forged mortgage, his stolen down payment, and his fake custody narrative were bulletproof. He had absolutely no idea that I was sitting on $18 million, and he had no idea that I held the digital keys to a federal indictment that would lock him in a cage for the next 20 years. Davis leaned back in his leather chair with a smug sigh, clearly believing his aggressive opening statement had entirely paralyzed me. But Beatrice could not resist the overwhelming urge to twist the knife herself. She placed her hands flat on the polished oak table and leaned toward me, her designer perfume wafting across the space, suffocating and heavy. She waved a dismissive hand at the mediator, silently demanding he remain quiet while she took absolute control of the room. "Let us drop the legal posturing for just a moment and speak candidly." Joanna Beatrice began, her voice dripping with aristocratic condescension. "You have always been completely out of your depth with this family. Cameron tried to elevate you. He truly did. He thought he could take a damaged working-class veteran and mold her into a woman suitable for our social circles. But you can never wash off that kind of inherent desperation. You have no refinement, no ambition beyond your little freelance computer repairs, and absolutely no understanding of how real power operates. You are clinging to this marriage and to my granddaughter because you know you are entirely incapable of surviving in our world on your own." I maintained my blank, unreadable expression. I did not blink. I did not shift in my chair. Under the table, I subtly pressed the discreet button on the side of my smartwatch. A tiny, almost invisible red light illuminated against my wrist, indicating that the device was securely recording every single syllable echoing in the glass-walled conference room. "Your silence is the smartest thing you have exhibited all day," Beatrice continued, completely emboldened by my apparent submission. She adjusted her cashmere wrap, her ego expanding to fill the entire room. "You think you can freeze his daily spending accounts and magically win a war of attrition? You are financially illiterate, Joanna. Do you honestly believe a man of Cameron's caliber keeps his true wealth in a joint checking account? We have spent the last 6 months systematically moving his substantial assets into offshore trusts that you cannot even pronounce, let alone access. He has secured a massive portfolio in the Cayman Islands, specifically designed to starve you out of legal fees. We have a war chest that will keep you buried in endless litigation until you are living in a cardboard box on the street. By the time we are finished, you will not have 2 pennies to rub together, and the court will gladly hand Lily over to the only parent who can actually afford to feed her." Cameron smirked, nodding in agreement with his mother's vicious monologue. He looked utterly relaxed, thoroughly convinced that his offshore shell game was a stroke of absolute genius. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "Take the settlement, Joanna. Take the crumbs we are offering and walk away. If you fight this, I promise you will never see Lily again." I let his threat hang in the sterile, air-conditioned air of the conference room. I let the silence stretch for 5 agonizing seconds, allowing their arrogant declarations to imprint permanently onto the digital recording strapped to my wrist. I finally smiled. It was not a smile of surrender. It was the terrifying cold smile of a soldier watching an enemy step directly onto a landmine. Right on cue, the heavy glass doors of Conference Room B swung open. Evelyn, my lead attorney from Sterling and Vance, strode into the room with the lethal grace of an apex predator. She had deliberately waited in the reception area, allowing Cameron and Beatrice to confidently dig their own graves before making her entrance. She did not wear a cheap off-the-rack suit. She wore immaculate custom-tailored Armani, and the three bulldog lawyers sitting beside Cameron instantly blanched as they recognized her. Evelyn Vance was a legend in Chicago legal circles, known for utterly destroying opposing counsel in high-stakes financial divorces. "I apologize for my slight delay," Evelyn announced, her voice carrying a sharp, ringing authority that instantly shattered Beatrice's manufactured dominance. "I was finalizing the filing of several expedited federal documents." Davis Cameron's lead attorney scrambled to sit up straight, his previous arrogance vanishing into thin air. "Evelyn," he stammered, clearly thrown completely off balance. "We were not informed that Sterling and Vance was representing Mrs. Wilson. We were told she was proceeding pro se." "You were told exactly what we wanted you to believe, Davis," Evelyn replied smoothly, taking the empty seat directly beside me. She opened her sleek leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of aggressively stamped legal documents. She did not slide them gently across the table. She dropped them with a loud, resounding thud directly in front of Cameron. "My client rejects your settlement offer," Evelyn stated, her eyes locking onto Cameron with laser precision. "Furthermore, my client rejects your fabricated emergency custody petition, which we are currently moving to strike based on documented perjury. But more importantly, Mr. Wilson, we are not here to discuss your fantasy of offshore trusts or your mother's offensive opinions on social class. We are here to discuss this." Cameron stared down at the documents, his confident smirk slowly dissolving into a mask of pure confusion. "What is this?" he asked, his voice losing its arrogant edge. "That is a federal subpoena," Evelyn answered, her tone dripping with surgical precision. "It was issued an hour ago, directed precisely at your brokerage firm. It demands an immediate full forensic audit of your entire client portfolio, specifically targeting the accounts of your three wealthiest elderly clients." The color drained instantly from Cameron's face. He looked as though the floor had suddenly dropped out from underneath him. Beatrice frowned, clearly, failing to grasp the immediate legal danger. "What kind of ridiculous intimidation tactic is this?" Beatrice demanded, attempting to regain control. "You cannot subpoena his firm over a simple divorce proceeding." "We are not subpoenaing his firm over a divorce," Beatrice, Evelyn corrected, leaning forward. "We are subpoenaing his firm because my client has documented irrefutable proof that Cameron recently secured a multi-million-dollar property in Malibu, a property purchased with a down payment that vastly exceeds his legal reportable income. We have provided the court with a highly detailed forensic accounting report showing exactly how Cameron embezzled $200,000 from his own clients to fund his little beachfront infidelity." Cameron choked on his next breath. He grabbed the documents, his hands shaking violently as he scanned the bold federal stamps and the itemized lists of his fraudulent wire transfers. Davis turned to Cameron, his eyes wide with professional terror. Cameron Davis hissed, his voice tight with panic. "Tell me this is a bluff. Tell me you did not mix client funds with your personal real estate transactions." Cameron could not speak. He was hyperventilating, his chest heaving as he stared at the absolute destruction of his career, his freedom, and his life laid out in black and white text. The realization hit him like a freight train. I had not just frozen his checking accounts, I had systematically dismantled his entire criminal enterprise. And just to ensure complete transparency, I finally spoke, breaking my long, calculated silence. I tapped the face of my smartwatch. "I have also recorded this entire mediation session, including Beatrice proudly admitting to hiding marital assets in the Cayman Islands to manipulate the family court. I am sure the judge will find that admission incredibly illuminating when we present our motion for sole custody of Lily and demand total control of the Chicago residence." Beatrice gasped, her hand flying to her throat as she realized the catastrophic magnitude of her mistake. She had handed me the exact leverage I needed to completely annihilate them. The three aggressive lawyers sitting beside them frantically began packing their briefcases, desperately wanting to distance themselves from a client who had just walked them blindly into a massive federal crime. The legal mediation abruptly ended in a stunned, suffocating silence. Exactly 3 hours later, The managing partner of Cameron's brokerage firm called my personal phone directly, his voice audibly tight with absolute panic, desperately demanding an immediate off-the-record crisis meeting. The voice on the other end of the line belonged to Marcus Thorne, the senior managing partner at Vanguard Liberty Financial. For a man who regularly handled billion-dollar portfolios and orchestrated hostile takeovers before breakfast, he sounded remarkably unhinged. He practically begged for a face-to-face conversation, bypassing all standard legal protocols and pleading with me to leave Evelyn and the rest of my legal team out of the discussion. I agreed to meet him, naming the Oak Ridge Country Club as our designated rendezvous point. It was a notoriously exclusive establishment, the exact kind of high society fortress where men like Cameron and Marcus conducted their backroom deals away from the prying eyes of the public. I arrived exactly on time, handing the keys of my modest sedan to a valet who looked completely and utterly bewildered that my car lacked a hood ornament. I bypassed the sprawling emerald golf course and walked directly into the mahogany-paneled dining room. Marcus was already seated in a secluded corner booth flanked by heavy velvet curtains that muffled the ambient clinking of crystal glasses and silver cutlery. He was a silver-haired patrician with sharp features currently sweating through his custom-tailored Italian suit. He stood up abruptly as I approached, his polite smile completely failing to mask the sheer terror radiating from his eyes. He gestured for me to sit, skipping the customary pleasantries entirely. He ordered a double scotch from a passing waiter, while I requested a simple glass of ice water. The moment the waiter retreated out of earshot, Marcus leaned across the polished table, dropping his voice to an urgent conspiratorial whisper. "Joanna, I want to thank you for agreeing to meet with me under such unusual circumstances." Marcus began nervously adjusting his silk tie. "Let us speak plainly. The federal subpoena your legal team dropped on my desk this morning is a nuclear option. It is a catastrophic weapon that threatens to obliterate not just the career of Cameron, but the entire foundational reputation of Vanguard Liberty. If the Securities and Exchange Commission formally audits our top-tier client portfolios, the resulting scandal will trigger a massive exodus of our most valuable investors. The firm will hemorrhage billions in a matter of days. We simply cannot allow this private marital dispute to bleed into the public financial sector." I took a slow sip of my water, letting the ice clink softly against the glass. "The decision to embezzle from your client ceased being a private marital dispute. The absolute second Cameron wired stolen funds to a real estate escrow account," I replied, my tone completely devoid of sympathy. Marcus swallowed hard, reaching into his leather briefcase, resting on the plush leather seat beside him. He pulled out a thick cream-colored folder and slid it slowly across the mahogany table until it rested directly in front of me. "I know Cameron has put you in an incredibly difficult position," Marcus said, switching to a tone of manufactured paternal concern. "I know you are facing a grueling custody battle and severe financial instability. My firm wants to help you navigate this transition comfortably." Inside that folder is a legally binding non-disclosure agreement paired with an irrevocable trust transfer. If you sign the agreement and officially withdraw the federal subpoena, Vanguard Liberty will immediately deposit $3 million into any account of your choosing. It is clean, untraceable hush money. You can walk away today with enough capital to secure the future of your daughter, buy a beautiful new home, and leave Cameron in the dust. You get financial independence, and my firm avoids a public relations nightmare. It is a flawless victory for you." I stared at the cream-colored folder. $3 million. It was a staggering sum of money for anyone, but to a woman they believed was a broke, struggling veteran, it was supposed to be an irresistible lifeline. Marcus watched my face hungrily, waiting for the inevitable moment. My eyes would widen with desperate greed. He fully expected me to snatch the folder, sign away my leverage, and vanish quietly into the night. He was applying the exact same playbook Beatrice and Cameron had used for years, assuming my silence could be bought, and my principles easily compromised by the sheer weight of their wealth. I did not touch the folder. I did not even lean forward. Instead, I calmly reached into the pocket of my blazer and retrieved a sleek, black flash drive. I placed it on the table, the metallic casing gleaming under the dim ambient lighting of the country club dining room. I used my index finger to slowly push the cream-colored folder back across the table, sliding the black flash drive into the empty space it had previously occupied. Marcus looked down at the small digital device, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. "What is this?" he asked, the false paternal warmth instantly evaporating from his voice. "That is the exact reason I am rejecting your insulting attempt at a bribe," I stated, locking my eyes onto his. "You seem to labor under the profound misconception that I am here to negotiate a settlement. I am not here to negotiate, Marcus. I am here to dictate the terms of your surrender." Marcus bristled, his ego violently clashing with his panic. "You are making a massive mistake, Joanna. You are walking away from guaranteed generational wealth." "I already have generational wealth," I replied smoothly, enjoying the fleeting flash of utter bewilderment that crossed his face. "I recently finalized the sale of a tech startup for $18 million. I do not need your hush money, and I certainly do not need your permission to destroy the life of Cameron. What you are looking at is irrefutable digital proof of a federal crime. That flash drive contains a complete mirror image of the hidden offshore routing network Cameron established. It details the exact mechanism he used to systematically drain funds from your three most vulnerable high-net-worth clients. It contains the account numbers, the time-stamped wire transfers, and the digital signatures linking the stolen capital directly to phantom shell corporations. Marcus stared at the drive as if it were a venomous snake coiled on the table. "It goes further," I continued, my voice dropping to a freezing absolute zero. "The drive also contains the final destination of those funds. It shows the exact moment the stolen client money was illegally funneled into the escrow account for a luxury beachfront property in Malibu. It proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that Cameron committed felony wire fraud and embezzlement while operating under the banner of Vanguard Liberty." The managing partner lost all remaining color in his face. His breathing became shallow and ragged. "If you have this evidence, why have you not already handed it to the authorities?" he demanded, his voice shaking. "Why meet with me at all?" "Because I wanted to look you in the eye when I gave you an ultimatum," I said softly. "You have exactly 24 hours to act, Marcus. By noon tomorrow, I expect Vanguard Liberty to formally terminate the employment of Cameron with cause. I expect your internal legal department to preemptively contact the Securities and Exchange Commission to report the embezzlement, officially throwing Cameron to the wolves to save your own firm. Furthermore, I expect you to freeze every single one of his company-sponsored benefit stock options and retirement portfolios to initiate restitution for your clients." Marcus stared at me in absolute horror. "You are asking me to publicly decimate my own top producer. The market fallout will be unprecedented." "I am telling you what will happen," I corrected him calmly. "If Vanguard Liberty attempts to protect Cameron, or if you attempt to bury this theft using your little non-disclosure agreements, I will not just send this flash drive to the Securities and Exchange Commission. I will send copies to the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and the local Chicago news networks. I will publicly expose your firm for actively shielding a predator who steals from the elderly. You will not just lose clients, Marcus. You will lose absolutely everything." Marcus stared at me, the blood completely draining from his sharp patrician features. His custom-tailored suit suddenly looked 2 sizes too large as he collapsed back into the plush leather booth. He did not attempt to argue. He did not offer another empty counteroffer. He looked at the sleek black flash drive resting on the mahogany table and realized his entire financial empire was balancing on the edge of a razor-sharp knife. He reached into his jacket with trembling fingers, pulling out his smartphone. He did not wait for me to leave. He dialed a number directly from the table, his eyes darting around the quiet room to ensure no one was listening. "Get the Chief Corporate Compliance Officer on a secure line right now," Marcus hissed into the receiver, completely abandoning his polished, unbothered corporate persona. "We have a catastrophic breach in the private wealth division. I need immediate containment measures deployed. Lock down every single account managed by Cameron Wilson. freeze his trading credentials, pull his building access, and get our federal defense counsel on a conference call in exactly 5 minutes. Marcus ended the call and stood up abruptly, leaving his untouched scotch on the table. He did not say goodbye. He grabbed his briefcase and practically sprinted out of the country club, leaving the cream folder with the $3 million bribe completely abandoned. I picked up the folder, dropped it into the nearest trash receptacle, and walked out into the cool evening air. The execution of my demands was swift, brutal, and utterly uncompromising. The dominoes began to fall before the sun even rose. The very next morning, Cameron arrived at the sleek downtown offices of Vanguard Liberty Financial exactly at 8 in the morning, carrying his expensive leather briefcase and wearing his signature arrogant smirk. He walked through the revolving glass doors expecting another day of manipulating the wealthy, schmoozing with billionaires, and funding his illicit lifestyle. Instead, he was met in the grand marble lobby by the chief compliance officer, 2 senior legal partners, and 3 armed private security guards. They did not allow him to step foot onto the executive floor. They did not allow him to return to his corner office to collect his personal items. Right there in the crowded lobby, surrounded by junior analysts and whispering receptionists, Cameron was formally terminated for cause. His corporate credit cards were instantly confiscated. His building identification badge was deactivated and physically clipped from his lapel by a security guard. Another guard handed him a small cardboard box containing a few personal photographs and his expensive fountain pens. The compliance officer loudly informed him that his professional trading licenses were suspended indefinitely, pending a sweeping multi-agency federal investigation into massive wire fraud and elder financial abuse. Cameron tried to protest, attempting to deploy his usual charismatic charm to talk his way out of the disaster, but the armed guards simply flanked him, grabbed him by the elbows, and physically marched him out of the building. He was unceremoniously deposited onto the crowded downtown sidewalk, clutching his pathetic cardboard box, entirely stripped of his power, his prestige, and his stolen wealth, The shockwave of his spectacular termination hit the Malibu real estate market by early afternoon. The sudden federal freeze on Cameron's assets triggered an immediate red flag at the escrow company handling the beachfront property. The massive wire transfer Cameron had initiated using the embezzled client funds was flagged halted and permanently reversed by federal authorities. Amber was sitting in a luxury furniture boutique picking out imported Italian marble countertops for a house she would never own, when the escrow officer called to inform her that she was now legally tied to a fraudulent deed connected to a federal embezzlement probe. The panic must have hit her like a physical blow. She realized instantly that Cameron was not a wealthy savior, but a sinking ship dragging her directly to a federal penitentiary. My phone buzzed with the first text message at exactly 3 in the afternoon. It was a frantic, rambling paragraph from Amber. She begged me to believe she had absolutely no idea where Cameron was getting the money. She claimed he had lied to her, manipulated her, and forced her to sign the mortgage documents. 10 minutes later, a second message arrived, completely abandoning any pretense of loyalty or affection toward Cameron. She explicitly offered to turn over all of his private emails, his hidden account passwords, and his text logs. She offered to testify against him in open court, promising to give the Securities and Exchange Commission everything they needed for a conviction in exchange for total legal immunity. I sat on my living room sofa reading the desperate messages as they flooded my screen. I did not type a single word in response. I did not answer her. Instead, I exported every message and the panicked voicemail that followed into an encrypted evidence folder, forwarded secure copies to Evelyn, and then blocked Amber's number. Despite being publicly fired, escorted out of his building by armed guards, and facing imminent criminal indictment, Cameron could not bring himself to face reality. He was fundamentally incapable of admitting defeat, especially to his fiercely judgmental mother. Instead of seeking criminal defense counsel, he retreated into a profound psychotic delusion. He drove to Beatrice's sprawling estate and spun an elaborate, spectacular lie. He told her he had heroically resigned from Vanguard Liberty because the firm was holding back his true potential. He claimed he was launching his own elite independent wealth management firm, utilizing the Malibu property as his new West Coast headquarters. He completely omitted the fact that his accounts were seized. His mistress was attempting to turn state's evidence against him, and he was currently under federal investigation for stealing from the elderly. Beatrice swallowed the lie without a single ounce of hesitation. Her entire existence was built on the foundation of maintaining an immaculate social facade, and she was desperate to prove to her wealthy friends that her son was ascending to even greater heights. She was determined to use Cameron's fabricated success as a weapon to permanently humiliate me and prove her superiority. In a bid to solidify their elite status, she immediately took absolute control of his social calendar. She ignored the glaring warning signs, ignored my uncharacteristic silence, and completely ignored the impending legal doom hanging heavily over her entire family. She quickly hired a dedicated team of elite event planners, fiercely demanding they organize the absolute most extravagant party of the season to celebrate Cameron's triumphant relocation to California. Exactly 4 days later, Beatrice's performance arrived at my front door in the hands of a private courier. The uniformed man required my signature before surrendering a thick, rigid envelope made from expensive cream-colored cardstock. Inside was a gold-embossed invitation to a housewarming and engagement gala at the Malibu estate. The event promised a 5-course dinner, a live string quartet, imported champagne, and a guest list filled with wealthy executives, country club members, politicians, and society photographers. Raised gold lettering presented Cameron and Amber as the new reigning couple of the California coast. Clipped to the invitation was a sheet of personalized stationery bearing the fabricated Wilson family crest. Beatrice had pressed her pen so firmly into the paper that the words were visible from the reverse side. "Come see what a real woman can provide for my son." The note read, the dark ink pressing deeply into the expensive paper. "Sign the divorce papers today. Let us take Lily quietly, or we will ruin you in court and leave you with absolutely nothing." I stared at the handwritten threat. A month ago, a note like this would have sent me spiraling into a panic attack. It would have made me question my worth and my ability to protect my daughter. But standing in my foyer, now armed with the knowledge of Cameron's destruction, I felt no intimidation. I felt a cold, surgical focus. Beatrice wanted to play a game of wealth and power, unaware she was bringing a plastic knife to a nuclear war. She was planning a massive celebration, completely blind to the fact that her son had just been escorted out of his office by armed guards. I walked into my home office, set the ostentatious invitation on my desk, and picked up my phone. I dialed Evelyn at Sterling and Vance. She answered on the first ring, her voice crisp and alert. "I need to know the exact legal status of the Malibu property right now," I stated, skipping the professional greetings entirely. Evelyn chuckled, a sharp sound of pure predatory amusement echoing through the receiver. "The property is currently in a state of extreme legal peril," Evelyn explained smoothly. Cameron secured the mortgage through a major national bank, but he used falsified income statements and the embezzled client funds for the down payment. The moment the federal investigation went public yesterday, that specific mortgage became a highly toxic asset. The bank is absolutely terrified. They are holding paper on a multi-million-dollar property secured by documented federal wire fraud. They know the Securities and Exchange Commission is about to seize Cameron's assets, and the bank desperately wants to offload that toxic debt before they get dragged into the federal indictment as a complicit party. I looked down at Beatrice's handwritten threat resting on my desk. "If the bank wants to offload the debt, then I want to buy it," I said, my voice dropping to a calm, icy register. Evelyn paused, clearly processing the magnitude of my request. "You want to buy the mortgage on the house where your husband is living with his mistress?" "I do not just want to buy it," I corrected her, my grip tightening on the phone. "I want to own the paper entirely. I want to be their lender." Evelyn did not hesitate for another second. "We will use your corporate holding company. The bank will be thrilled to quietly sell the debt to a private corporate entity to avoid a public relations disaster. Give me exactly 2 hours to draft the acquisition papers and initiate contact with their commercial lending division." I immediately authorized the transfer of funds from my offshore tech startup sale. My corporate holding company, a completely anonymous entity with zero public ties to my personal name, approached the national bank holding Cameron's fraudulent mortgage. The bank executives were indeed in a state of absolute panic over the federal probe into Vanguard Liberty. When my corporate representatives offered to purchase the toxic debt outright, the bank treated us like saviors. They were desperate to wipe the fraudulent loan off their books before the federal auditors arrived and started asking uncomfortable questions. We purchased the debt for its full value, utilizing clean, untraceable corporate capital. The entire transaction was handled with absolute discretion and blinding speed. By the time the bank processed the massive wire transfer, my holding company was the sole legal owner of the mortgage on the Malibu beach house. Cameron and Amber no longer owed the bank a single dime. They owed me. They were living in a spectacular multi-million-dollar glass mansion, completely oblivious to the fact that their scorned, supposedly destitute victim was now holding the mortgage on their fraudulent kingdom. The moment the ink dried on the acquisition papers, I drove directly to the Sterling and Vance offices in downtown Chicago. Evelyn was waiting for me in her corner office, spreading a massive stack of legal documents across her glass desk. "You own the debt," Evelyn confirmed, handing me a heavy gold-embossed pen. "Now we execute the trap. Because the original loan was secured through documented federal wire fraud and embezzlement, the mortgage contract contains a standard criminality clause. The moment a borrower commits felony fraud to secure the funds, the loan is automatically placed into an immediate, irreversible state of default." I looked at the documents, tracing the dense legal jargon with my eyes. "We do not have to wait for them to miss a payment," I asked, verifying the mechanism of our attack. "We do not have to wait for anything." Evelyn smiled, a dangerous, thrilling expression that lit up her features. "The fraud triggers an accelerated, aggressive foreclosure process. Cameron breached the contract the second he forged those income statements and wired stolen client money into the escrow account. You have the legal right to demand the full balance of the loan immediately. Since Cameron's accounts are entirely frozen by the federal government, he absolutely cannot pay. Therefore, you have the right to seize the collateral. The collateral is the house itself." I signed the documents, my signature flowing smoothly across the thick legal paper. "Initiate the foreclosure," I instructed. "Do not give them a single inch of breathing room." Evelyn moved with ruthless efficiency. Utilizing the undeniable proof of Cameron's financial crimes, she filed the accelerated foreclosure paperwork with the California courts. Because the fraud was thoroughly documented by the ongoing federal investigation, the presiding judge granted the emergency motion without a moment of hesitation. The legal machinery ground forward with unstoppable momentum. The courts recognized my corporate holding company as the defrauded lender and awarded us immediate possession of the collateral. The county clerk stamped the paperwork, formally nullifying Cameron and Amber's claim to the property. In the span of 48 hours, the deed to the breathtaking Malibu beach house was legally transferred entirely into my name. I was now the sole undisputed owner of the sprawling coastal estate. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows in Evelyn's office, looking out over the busy Chicago skyline. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was an automated alert confirming the deed transfer had been officially recorded in the county registry. I pulled Beatrice's ostentatious invitation from my blazer pocket and stared at the swirling gold calligraphy. They were still planning their massive, extravagant celebration. Beatrice was still managing the caterers, ordering the expensive champagne and coordinating the string quartet. Cameron was still hiding his catastrophic termination from his mother, pretending he was a successful independent wealth manager. Amber was still panicking, desperately trying to trade her useless loyalty for federal immunity. They were all continuing to play their respective roles in this grand, pathetic illusion. They had no idea their stage had been bought out from underneath them. They had no idea the ground they stood on belonged to the woman they had tried to destroy. I carefully folded the gold-embossed invitation and slipped it back into my pocket. The trap was set perfectly primed and ready to snap shut. I was going to attend that party. Later that evening, after I returned home, the gold-embossed invitation was resting on my kitchen counter, when my cell phone vibrated with an unexpected caller ID. It was Winston Cameron's father. Throughout my marriage, Winston had been the only member of the Wilson family who possessed a shred of genuine decency. He rarely spoke up during family dinners, choosing to fade into the wallpaper, while his wife and son systematically tore down everyone around them. When I answered the phone, his voice was barely a whisper, thick with exhaustion and anxiety. He asked if we could meet privately far away from the prying eyes of his wife. I agreed immediately, suggesting a rundown diner on the industrial edge of town. I arrived at the diner early and secured a booth in the far back corner. The air smelled faintly of stale coffee. 10 minutes later, Winston walked through the glass door. He looked 10 years older than the last time I had seen him. His shoulders were slumped. His expensive trench coat hung loosely on a frame that had lost weight, and the dark circles under his eyes spoke of chronic sleeplessness. He slid into the booth across from me, glancing nervously over his shoulder, as if expecting Beatrice to suddenly materialize. Winston finally leaned forward, resting his shaking hands on the sticky laminate surface. "I saw the invitation list for Saturday," Winston began, his voice trembling with fear. Beatrice left her event planning binder open. "Joanna, you cannot go to that party. I am begging you." "Why would I do that, Winston?" Beatrice was very explicit in her handwritten note. "She wants me to witness Cameron and Amber stepping into their new life. You do not understand the scale of what she is orchestrating. This is not a simple housewarming. Beatrice has invited the entire board of directors from the country club, 3 local politicians, and half the executive partners from Cameron's former firm. She even hired a professional photography crew from Chicago Elite Lifestyle magazine to cover the event. She is treating this like a royal coronation. And what exactly is the narrative she is selling to this audience?" "She is selling your absolute destruction," Winston said, looking at me with unfiltered pity. "She is telling everyone that Cameron left you because you became unstable and financially irresponsible. She is framing Amber as his savior, a brilliant young woman who helped him secure a massive coastal estate. They are going to use this party to publicly legitimize Amber and officially welcome her into high society. Beatrice expects you to show up and fight for your marriage. She wants you to walk through those doors so she can publicly humiliate you in front of the most powerful people in the city. She plans to parade Amber around that sprawling mansion, showing off the wealth and luxury you supposedly lost until you break down and cause a scene. The photographers are there specifically to capture your reaction. She wants to ruin your reputation permanently and use those photos in family court to prove you are entirely unfit to have primary custody of Lily." Beatrice was operating on the absolute certainty that Cameron actually owned the Malibu property. She was building an entire social empire on a foundation of stolen sand, completely unaware that I currently held the deed to the very ground she was planning to stand on. Winston reached across the table. "Joanna, you have always been a good person. You are a wonderful mother to my granddaughter. But you do not know how to fight people like Beatrice. She does not use logic or fairness. She uses venom and social leverage. She will strip you of your dignity in front of 300 people, and she will smile for the cameras while she does it. Please, for your own sanity, stay in Chicago. Let them have the beach house. Let them have their twisted little victory. You and Lily can start over somewhere safe." He had spent his entire adult life surrendering to Beatrice, believing that submission was the only way to survive her wrath. He was offering me the only survival strategy he knew: run away and hide. I reached into my leather tote bag. I bypassed my phone and my wallet, my fingers closing around a crisp, heavy paper envelope I had prepared specifically for this meeting. I pulled the envelope out and placed it gently onto the sticky table, sliding it directly across to Winston. He stared at the blank white envelope, his brow furrowing in confusion. "What is this?" "Open it," I instructed softly. Winston picked up the envelope and broke the seal. He reached inside and pulled out a premium first-class boarding pass. He stared at the printed destination, his eyes widening in absolute shock. It was a direct non-stop flight from Chicago to Maui, scheduled to depart early Friday morning. Inside the envelope, tucked neatly behind the boarding pass, was a confirmed reservation for a luxury suite at a highly exclusive Hawaiian resort booked for a full 30 days, completely prepaid. Joanna Winston stammered, dropping the ticket onto the table as if it burned his fingers. I cannot accept this. What is going on? You told me on my wedding day that you always dreamed of retiring to Hawaii, I said, leaning forward, my voice steady and warm. You told me you wanted to sit on a quiet beach, drink terrible tropical cocktails, and never look at another country club newsletter for the rest of your life. I also know that Beatrice controls all of the joint accounts and gives you a humiliating allowance to ensure you can never actually leave her. Winston flushed shame, painting his cheeks a dull red. You should not be spending your savings on me. You need every penny for the divorce lawyers. My financial situation has recently improved, I replied, my tone leaving absolutely no room for argument. And you need to listen to me very carefully, Winston. I am giving you this ticket because you are the only person in the Wilson family who ever treated me like a human being. You are the only one who ever truly loved Lily without treating her like a prop. Because of that, I want you entirely out of the blast radius. Winston looked up from the ticket, his expression shifting from confusion to genuine alarm. The blast radius. Joanna, what are you talking about? I reached across the table and placed my hand over his, squeezing his trembling fingers. I need you to go home tonight and pack a single bag. Do not tell Beatrice where you are going. Do not leave a note. Just take an Uber to the airport on Friday morning and get on that plane. Turn off your cell phone the moment you sit down in first class and do not turn it back on until you are sitting on a beach in Maui. But the party, Winston protested, his voice laced with panic. Beatrice will absolutely destroy me if I am not standing right next to her for the photographs. She will cut me out of everything. By Sunday morning, Beatrice is not going to have anything left to cut you out of, I stated, my voice dropping to a freezing absolute zero. The social empire she thinks she is building is already dead. The money Cameron thinks he has is already gone. That beach house they are using as a stage for their grand coronation does not belong to them. Winston stared at me, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to comprehend the magnitude of my words. He looked into my eyes and saw the cold surgical determination of a soldier who had already rigged the entire battlefield with explosives. He slowly realized I was not the desperate, terrified victim Beatrice thought she was luring into a trap. I was the predator, and they had willingly locked themselves inside my cage. I stood up, leaving a $20 bill for the coffee. I looked at my father-in-law, offering a reassuring smile. Take the flight, Winston. Enjoy it. Please do not worry about my reputation. I am not just going to the party, Winston. I am hosting it. The warm breeze rolled off the ocean, carrying the scent of salt through the open terrace doors of the Malibu beach house. Saturday night arrived, and the estate was dripping in an excessive luxury that felt entirely unearned. Waiters moved through the living room, balancing trays of hors d'oeuvres and Wagyu beef. A champagne tower glimmered near the pool, reflecting against the glass. A string quartet played, providing a soundtrack to the ongoing theft. Beneath a crystal chandelier, Beatrice held court. She was in her element, gripping champagne, projecting her voice so every friend could hear. She wore an emerald green gown, her neck heavy with diamonds. Cameron escaped his toxic wife, Beatrice announced, gesturing toward her son. She paused, allowing murmurs to wash over her audience. It was a tragedy, truly. She held his career back for years. The woman had no class, no ambition, and a victim complex. Thankfully, my son recognized his worth. He secured this property as a testament to his capabilities. Amber stood beside Beatrice, glowing under the praise. She wore a crimson dress, ensuring her left hand remained visible. She flaunted a diamond ring, lifting her hand to guarantee the stone caught the light. She was oblivious to the fact that the dazzling jewelry on her finger had been purchased with stolen funds. Cameron stood nearby, attempting to look the part of the triumphant magnate. He held a glass of scotch, smiling as colleagues clapped him on the shoulder, but his eyes darted toward the entrance. Despite being stripped of his licenses and facing a federal indictment, he had kept the catastrophic truth hidden from his mother. The atmosphere was thick with arrogance and elaborate stage play built on a foundation of federal wire fraud. At exactly 9 o'clock, the massive oak doors swung open. The string quartet faltered in the middle of a note. Conversations stopped. Waiters froze with silver trays balanced in their hands, and every face in the room turned toward the entrance. I stepped across the threshold wearing a sharply tailored midnight blue suit. My hair was pulled away from my face, and a slim leather briefcase rested securely in my hand. Two imposing men in dark trench coats entered beside me, their expressions unreadable and their purpose deliberately concealed. The guests recognized me immediately. They had spent the evening listening to Beatrice describe a broken, impoverished former soldier who was too unstable to care for her own daughter. The woman standing before them did not resemble that description. Cameron's glass tilted in his hand, spilling scotch across the cuff of his tuxedo. Amber lowered the hand displaying her diamond ring and moved instinctively behind him. Beatrice remained beneath the chandelier, her champagne flute suspended halfway to her lips, as the last traces of her triumphant smile disappeared. The crowd slowly separated, clearing a path from the entrance to the center of the room. I walked forward without speaking, the measured sound of my heels echoing across the marble floor. The two men remained at my sides. By the time I stopped, the entire party was silent and no one had moved. Beatrice was the first to break the paralysis. Her face, previously stretched into a mask of manufactured joy and supreme arrogance, contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. The emerald jewels around her neck flashed as she marched aggressively across the imported Italian marble floor, completely abandoning the polished high society persona she had spent decades cultivating. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger directly at my chest. "Get out of my son's house this instant!" Beatrice screamed, her shrill voice echoing violently off the massive glass walls. "Security! Where is the private security I paid for? Grab this uninvited trash and throw her out onto the street immediately. Do not let her take another step into this party." She scanned the room, frantically searching for the armed guards she had hired to protect the perimeter. Two men wearing earpieces and black suits stepped hesitantly out of the crowd, but they immediately froze when my two escorts shifted their weight, opening their trench coats just enough to reveal the unmistakable gleam of federal badges clipped to their belts. The private guards wisely decided that a country club paycheck was not worth interfering with a federal operation. They raised their hands in quiet surrender and backed away, leaving Beatrice entirely exposed and unsupported in the middle of the room. Realizing that his mother's aggressive tactics were failing spectacularly, Cameron rushed forward to intercept me. His custom tuxedo suddenly looked restrictive as he furiously cornered me against the edge of the grand entryway. The confident, triumphant magnate who had been holding court just moments prior was completely gone, replaced by a desperate, sweating fraud. He leaned in close, his face inches from mine. His jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might shatter. He hissed at me under his breath, his words dripping with a toxic mixture of panic and malice. "What is wrong with you?" Cameron spat, his eyes darting frantically toward the crowd of silent onlookers. "Are you entirely psychotic? You are a jealous, pathetic ex-wife who cannot accept the reality of her own failure. You are trying to ruin my night in front of my new peers because you know you will never belong in a room like this. You are nothing but an anchor, and I finally cut you loose. I am giving you exactly 5 seconds to turn around and walk out those doors before I call the local police and have you arrested for criminal trespassing and harassment." He continued his desperate tirade, oblivious to the fact that the men flanking me were not simple bodyguards. "Do you see those people watching us?" Cameron demanded, gesturing sharply toward the wealthy executives and politicians staring from the edges of the room. "Those are the most powerful individuals in this state. They are my friends. They are my colleagues. They are here to celebrate my success and welcome Amber into this community. You are embarrassing yourself, Joanna. You are proving exactly why I had to leave you behind. You are making a pathetic, desperate scene because you want a larger slice of my wealth in the divorce settlement. Well, you are getting absolutely nothing. I will make sure my legal team buries you so deeply you will not even be able to afford a studio apartment." He reached for his phone, pulling it from his pocket with shaking hands to make good on his threat to dial the authorities. Amber stood a few feet behind him, proudly flaunting her massive diamond engagement ring, completely unaware that the jewelry was purchased with stolen client funds. Her eyes were wide with dramatic indignation, fully expecting her wealthy savior to easily dispose of his crazy former spouse. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice, nor did I shrink away from his aggressive posture. I simply looked at him with a profound freezing emptiness. He was a hollow shell of a man projecting strength while standing over a trapdoor he had built himself. I gracefully sidestepped his blocking maneuver, ignoring his frantic whispered threats entirely. My custom-tailored suit moved perfectly with me as I walked directly past him, stepping confidently into the vast open center of the lavish living room. The crowd parted further, their eyes glued to my every movement. Cameron stumbled slightly as I bypassed him, his phone completely forgotten in his hand. He spun around, staring at my back, as I claimed the absolute center of the room. Beatrice opened her mouth to scream another insult, but the sheer unwavering confidence of my stride forced the words back down her throat. I walked over to the towering crystalline champagne pyramid that had been meticulously arranged near the edge of the infinity pool. The caterers had fled the immediate area, leaving a silver tray of perfectly polished spoons resting on a nearby marble high-top table. I reached out and picked up a single flawless crystal champagne flute from the base of the tower. Then I picked up a silver spoon. I turned to face the entire room, ensuring that every single guest, every wealthy country club friend, and every photographer from the lifestyle magazine had a clear, unobstructed view of me. Cameron and Beatrice stood frozen on the periphery, watching in absolute paralyzed horror as I took a deep breath. I raised the crystal flute into the air and tapped it loudly with the silver spoon. The sharp, ringing chime of the crystal echoed perfectly through the cavernous space, slicing through the tension like a razor blade. It was the universal signal for a celebration toast, and the deeply ingrained social conditioning of the room forced everyone to turn their full, undivided attention directly to me. The photographers, sensing the climax of the evening's drama, immediately raised their heavy cameras, the rapid-fire clicking of their shutters sounding like a swarm of mechanical insects. Flashbulbs illuminated the room, casting stark shadows against the walls. I smiled warmly at the sea of terrified and confused faces. "Excuse me, everyone." I announced, my voice carrying a bright, welcoming clarity that contrasted sharply with the underlying devastation of my words. "I want to thank you all so much for coming out tonight to view my new property." The sudden gasp from the wealthy audience was genuine and visceral. I raised my champagne glass slightly higher, acknowledging the stunned guests with a gracious nod. I know Beatrice went through an incredible amount of trouble organizing this lavish event, and I truly appreciate her taking the initiative to plan such a spectacular housewarming party on my behalf. It is not every day that a woman acquires a multi-million-dollar coastal estate completely free and clear. I took a slow, deliberate sip from the crystal flute, savoring the absolute silence. Cameron's face completely drained of all remaining color as the devastating reality of my words finally began to register in his terrified mind. He looked frantically toward his mother, silently begging for a denial that would never come. Amber dropped her hand, the brilliant sparkle of her stolen diamond ring suddenly seeming remarkably dull in the suffocating quiet of the room. The trap had perfectly closed. The crowd erupted into confused murmurs. Whispers rippled through the sea of gowns and tuxedos as the guests struggled to comprehend the shift in power. I could see the moment the narrative Beatrice had spun began to disintegrate. They had been told I was a pathetic, struggling freelancer. I set my crystal champagne flute down. I adjusted the cuffs of my blazer and looked directly at the country club board members. I said, "For the past decade, I allowed my former family to believe I was nothing more than a computer technician. I am the founder and CEO of Aegis Vanguard Solutions, a multi-million-dollar defense technology firm. I unclasped the sleek, heavy leather briefcase. The collective intake of breath was audible as I pulled out a thick stack of certified legal documents. I walked directly over to Beatrice. She was trembling, her emerald gown suddenly looking like a ridiculous costume on a frightened old woman. Her hands were clutching her pearl necklace. I pressed the heavy stack firmly against her chest, forcing her to instinctively grab them. "That is the formal foreclosure notice," I stated. "Attached to it is the recorded deed to this exact property. You will notice that my corporate holding company is listed as the sole proprietor. I own every single inch of the ground you are standing on, Beatrice. I own the infinity pool. I own the master suite where your son currently sleeps. I legally acquired the fraudulent mortgage your son created, and the moment the ink dried, the loan defaulted due to his documented federal crimes." Beatrice stared down at the legal papers, her eyes darting frantically across the bold black text. Her mouth opened and closed repeatedly, but she was incapable of forming a coherent sentence. The color drained from her heavily contoured face. I did not give her a chance to recover. I pulled my smartphone from my blazer pocket and swiped open the screen. This house, like all modern luxury estates, was equipped with a state-of-the-art integrated Bluetooth surround sound system. With 3 simple taps on my screen, my phone synced directly to the master control hub. "I think it is only fair that your guests understand exactly who they are celebrating tonight," I announced to the silent room. "Let us start with the matriarch of the Wilson family." I hit play. The hidden speakers mounted seamlessly into the ceiling crackled to life, filling the massive living room with the crisp, undeniable audio recording I had captured during our court-mandated mediation session. Beatrice's own voice echoed off the glass walls, sharp, arrogant, and saturated with malice. "Of course we hid the assets," the recorded voice of Beatrice sneered from above. "We transferred everything into offshore holding accounts weeks before Cameron filed the divorce papers. We made sure you would not get a single dime of the real money. You are a naive fool if you thought we would let you take half of what my son built. We are going to bleed you dry in family court until you are begging for a settlement." The recording stopped, leaving a heavy, toxic silence. The wealthy socialite stared at Beatrice with unfiltered disgust. She had spent the entire evening painting me as a gold-digging villain, only to have her own voice broadcast a confession of premeditated financial fraud to the entire room. Beatrice pressed her hands over her ears, shaking her head in denial. I tapped my screen again. "And now," I continued smoothly, "let us hear from the glowing bride-to-be." I pressed play on the second audio file. This time it was Amber's voice projecting through the surround sound system. It was the frantic, sobbing voicemail she had left on my phone just days earlier, when the reality of Cameron's crimes first began to crash down upon her. "Joanna, please, you have to believe me," the recorded. Amber begged, her voice high-pitched and hysterical. "I had no idea Cameron was stealing from his clients. I swear I did not know the money was dirty. He told me the down payment for the Malibu house was a massive bonus from his firm. He lied to me. He used embezzled client funds to secure the mortgage, and he forced me to sign the closing documents. I will give the federal investigators everything they need. I will give them his emails, his passwords, his hidden ledgers. Just please tell them I am innocent. Please do not let them send me to prison." The audio cut out. The reaction from the crowd was instantaneous and devastating. Several of Cameron's former clients were standing near the front of the room. Beatrice had specifically invited them to showcase her son's supposed independent success. I watched as realization dawned on the faces of 3 older gentlemen standing by the bar. The stolen money Amber had just cried about on the recording was their money. It was their retirement funds, their life savings funneled into a fraudulent account to pay for the extravagant displays of wealth surrounding them. One of the men looked down at the expensive champagne in his hand, realizing his stolen savings had paid for the alcohol he was drinking. He threw the crystal glass directly onto the floor, shattering it into 100 pieces. "You stole from us!" the man roared, taking an aggressive step toward Cameron. "You miserable, thieving fraud," Cameron snapped, the polished, unbothered facade completely shattered under the weight of his public annihilation. With a primal yell, he lunged across the room, desperately diving toward me in a pathetic attempt to grab my phone and stop the destruction of his life. He never even made it within arm's reach. The two imposing men in dark trench coats who had flanked me since my arrival moved with blinding coordinated speed. The man on my left stepped forward, planting his feet firmly and catching Cameron by the lapels of his custom tuxedo. He expertly twisted his grip, utilizing Cameron's own momentum to violently redirect him. Cameron hit the marble floor hard, sliding several feet before crashing into the base of the expensive champagne tower. The crystal structure wobbled dangerously before collapsing, sending dozens of glasses and gallons of champagne crashing down upon him in a spectacular sticky cascade. Amber saw her opportunity. While all eyes were momentarily fixed on Cameron thrashing wildly in the puddle of broken glass and expensive alcohol, she tried to slip quietly away. She dropped her designer clutch, kicked off her stiletto heels, and bolted toward the heavy glass doors leading out to the rear patio. She was trying to disappear into the warm coastal night, desperately hoping to outrun the severe consequences of her exceptionally poor choices. She did not make it past the threshold. The second man in the dark trench coat intercepted her effortlessly. He stepped squarely into the open doorway, completely blocking her path to freedom. Amber slammed into his solid frame and bounced backward, falling heavily onto the expensive carpet. The man reached into his coat and pulled out a leather credential case, flipping it open to display a gleaming silver federal badge. "United States Marshals!" the man announced, his voice carrying the absolute uncompromising weight of federal authority. The room instantly fell into a dead, terrified silence. He looked down at Amber, sobbing loudly on the floor, then turned his attention directly to Cameron, who was struggling to pull his soaked, humiliated body up from the ruined champagne tower. Cameron Wilson, the marshal, continued pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. "We are here to execute a federal felony arrest warrant. You are being taken into custody for massive wire fraud, money laundering, and the embezzlement of over $12 million in private client funds. Do not attempt to resist." I stood perfectly still in the center of the room, watching the federal agents haul my ex-husband to his feet. Beatrice was slumped against a marble pillar, weeping uncontrollably as her entire social universe evaporated forever. The crowd of elite guests watched in stunned, horrified silence as Cameron was aggressively handcuffed behind his back. The trap had not merely closed, it had completely obliterated them all. As the marshals pulled Cameron upright and secured his hands behind his back, the photographers continued recording every second of his downfall. A second agent helped Amber from the floor, informed her that she was being detained for questioning, and escorted her away from the rear doors she had tried to use as an escape. The guests began moving toward the exit, distancing themselves from Cameron before the scandal could attach itself to their names. Within moments, the celebration had collapsed into broken glass, abandoned champagne, and frightened whispers. Beatrice, completely stripped of her immense pride, her meticulously curated social standing, and her precious golden child, fell heavily to her knees on the cold marble floor. She looked around frantically and begged her wealthy country club friends to forcefully intervene, pleading for someone to stop the federal agents. But the elite guests, utterly terrified of being closely associated with a severe federal embezzlement scandal, all turned their backs and walked out the front door in absolute disgust. Left completely alone in the tragic wreckage of her son's ruined celebration, Beatrice looked up at me. She was weeping uncontrollably, desperate tears ruining her makeup as she begged me for mercy. I stared down at her, feeling absolutely no pity or compassion for the wretched woman who had mercilessly tormented me. "You told me to ask the army for help when my daughter was dying," I said, my voice carrying a lethal, freezing calm that instantly silenced her sobbing. "Well, Beatrice, the army taught me exactly how to efficiently neutralize a threat. You have exactly 20 minutes to vacate my property before I have you physically removed." A brief flash forward, exactly 6 months into the future, reveals how the relentless justice system completely dismantled the pathetic remnants of the Wilson family. Cameron was officially found guilty on multiple serious federal charges and is currently serving a lengthy, miserable sentence in a maximum security federal prison. His once promising professional and financial life lies in absolute, unrecoverable ruins. He spends his endless days scrubbing concrete floors and serving food to other inmates permanently stripped of the arrogant superiority he once wielded like a devastating weapon against his vulnerable clients. Amber, utterly terrified of sharing his dismal, confined fate, quickly took a harsh plea deal and willingly provided federal prosecutors with all the necessary damning evidence to guarantee and secure his swift conviction. She successfully avoided jail time, but was saddled with a massive, crippling financial burden. She is currently working an exhausting, grueling minimum wage retail job, forced to surrender the vast majority of her modest weekly paycheck to pay off her immense court-ordered restitution to the various clients they maliciously defrauded. Beatrice fared absolutely no better in the devastating, catastrophic aftermath of the public arrest. The high-profile scandal utterly destroyed her carefully protected societal reputation and entirely vaporized her former influence. Her elite exclusive country club immediately revoked her prestigious membership, and her once loyal wealthy friends permanently erased her from their elite social registers without a single second thought. Winston, having finally discovered the full toxic extent of her manipulative financial deceit and relentless emotional abuse, filed for an immediate divorce and permanently left her behind. Beatrice is now entirely socially exiled, living completely alone in a tiny, rundown, depressing one-bedroom apartment located on the bleak, undesirable outskirts of the sprawling city. She spends her lonely, pathetic days bitterly watching daytime television, endlessly mourning the glittering, opulent empire she so foolishly threw away through her own toxic, insatiable greed. As for me, the story beautifully ends with a profound, unshakable sense of lasting peace and quiet triumph. I was casually walking barefoot along the pristine, sunlit beach in gorgeous Malibu, the warm, soothing Pacific water washing gently over my tired ankles as I moved. The refreshing ocean breeze carried the clean, salty, invigorating scent of the beautiful sea, immediately clearing my busy mind. Ahead of me, sprinting joyfully and wildly along the sandy shoreline, was a fully recovered, wonderfully smiling Lily. The dark, terrifying shadow of her previous illness had completely passed, brilliantly replaced by the bright, unstoppable, chaotic energy of a truly happy, healthy, and vibrant young child. She stopped suddenly to eagerly pick up a perfectly shaped seashell, quickly turning to proudly wave it at me, with a brilliant, adorable, gap-toothed smile that melted my heart completely. I happily smiled back at her, my full heart unexpectedly swelling with an overwhelming, profound, and deeply rooted gratitude that I could barely contain within my chest. Winston occasionally visits us, happily driving up the scenic, winding coast to spend extremely pleasant, relaxing weekend afternoons, sitting quietly on the wooden patio overlooking the sparkling water. He genuinely looks at least 10 years younger since finally finalizing his extremely messy, complicated divorce from the endlessly manipulative Beatrice. The heavy, oppressive, suffocating weight that used to constantly drag down his tired shoulders has entirely vanished, leaving him lighter. He is finally free, genuinely happy, and proudly enjoying his new role as a wonderful, supportive grandfather figure to my precious Lily. We peacefully drink sweet iced tea, quietly watch the spectacular, breathtaking sunset together, and never speak of the dark, painful past. My professional life has miraculously grown far beyond my initial expectations. I have vastly expanded my successful defense tech company, eagerly securing additional lucrative contracts, and proudly moving my dedicated team into a massive modern corporate headquarters downtown. But my greatest, most fulfilling achievement has absolutely nothing to do with generating corporate profits. Using a significant portion of my personal wealth, I passionately established a national charitable foundation explicitly dedicated to providing immediate zero-restriction emergency medical grants to the struggling families of active-duty military personnel and honored veterans. No desperate mother will ever have to sit alone in a stark, terrifying hospital waiting room, completely paralyzed by the horrific realization that she cannot afford the life-saving treatment her beloved child desperately needs to survive. The foundation handles the overwhelming medical bills, the temporary housing, and the complex travel logistics, generously allowing families to focus entirely on healing. It is my dedicated way of ensuring that the suffocating nightmare I endured will never be repeated. I looked out at the ocean knowing I didn't just survive the fire, I controlled the flames. The ultimate tragedy of betrayal often lies not in the act itself, but in the arrogant expectation that the victim will simply shrink away into the shadows. People who operate through manipulation and deceit rely on a dangerous assumption. They constantly mistake silence for weakness and grace for surrender. However, true power never needs to loudly announce itself. While toxic individuals waste their energy constructing elaborate facades built on lies and stolen resources, the most formidable people work quietly in the background. They do not exhaust themselves screaming into the void or begging for validation from those incapable of giving it. Instead, they meticulously build their own empires, focusing their energy on genuine success, undeniable facts, and absolute self-reliance. When the time finally comes for a reckoning, it is not an act of petty vindictiveness, but a masterclass in establishing ironclad boundaries. Reclaiming your narrative means severing the toxic ties that actively seek to drag you down. You never have to accept the role of the helpless victim that manipulative people try to force upon you. You possess the absolute right to stand tall, present the indisputable truth, and evict the negativity from your life, sometimes quite literally. The most satisfying resolution is never just about watching a house of cards collapse. It is about protecting your own peace and securing a future where you dictate the terms. You can let the fire that was meant to consume you be the exact same energy that forges your newfound unshakable independence. If you have ever had to quietly reclaim your power from those who severely underestimated your strength, share your own journey of triumph in the comments section below and hit subscribe for more empowering stories of resilience and undeniable justice.